The rope bit into her wrists as they dragged her across the courtyard. She kicked, and she twisted, and she screamed for help, and not one person standing there moved a muscle. A boot caught her hard in the ribs, and she went down onto the frozen stones. She curled both arms around her belly to shield the child growing inside her. Above her, a cold voice read out the sentence, flat and final, and then the guards hauled her up and threw her out past the wall into the snow. Her name was Illyra, and until that morning she had been a lord's daughter. Now she owned nothing but the clothes on her back and the last coin sewn into her sleeve. So why would a king let the whole world believe he was a broken animal, sold off cheap in a market? Stay with me on this one. She walked until the gray light started to die. The road out of her father's lands ran east through pine and old snow, and Illyra followed it because she did not know what else to do. Her cloak was thin. Her boots were good, but they were town boots, made for stone floors and warm halls, and they were already soaked through. Every hour the cold got a little deeper into her. Every hour the baby inside her felt a little heavier, a little more real, a little more like the only thing in the world she had left to protect. Twice that first day she nearly sat down. That is the thing about the cold nobody tells you until you have felt it for yourself. It does not come at you like an enemy. It comes at you like a friend. It tells you, very gently, that you are tired, and that the snow under that big pine over there looks soft, and that you could just rest for a moment, just close your eyes for a little while, and everything would stop hurting. The first time the thought came to her, she was halfway to her knees before she caught herself. The second time she bit down on the inside of her cheek until she tasted blood, and she used the pain to stand back up, because the pain at least was hers, and it was awake, and it kept her moving. She put one hand flat on her belly, and she said out loud, "To no one, to the trees, not you. Whatever happens to me, not you." And she walked. Now, you have to understand how she got here, because it matters. Illyra was the only daughter of Lord Harwin of Greywater, a hard man with a soft reputation. In the great hall he smiled and poured wine and talked about honor. Behind the doors he counted every coin twice and hit the servants who miscounted. He had raised her to be worth something to somebody. A good marriage, a strong alliance, a price he could collect. That was what a daughter was in her father's book, a thing you kept clean until you could sell it. She had learned that lesson young, and she had learned it in a way that stuck. When she was 9 years old, she had brought a lame kitchen boy a heel of bread because he had been beaten and left in the yard without supper, and her father had found out, and he had not struck her, because he never struck her. He was far too careful for that. Instead, he had made her stand in the great hall and explain to the assembled household why she had wasted his bread on a boy who could no longer work. She could not explain it. She was 9. She only knew the boy was hungry, and she was not. Her father had nodded slowly, as if she had proved some point of his, and he had said, in front of everyone, "Softness is a leak in the roof. It looks like nothing until the whole house rots." And he had docked the bread from the boy's family's wages, so that her kindness had cost them, which she understood even then was the true lesson. Not that she should be cruel, but that her kindness was dangerous, and would always be paid for by someone she was trying to help. She never learned it. That was the whole trouble with Illyra. She heard the lesson, and she understood the lesson, and she went right on carrying bread to hungry boys her entire life, and every single time it cost her, and every single time she did it again. Remember that about her. It's going to matter more than anything else in this story. And then, 4 months back, on a night she still could not fully explain, everything changed. There had been a stranger, a wounded man on the edge of their woods, half dead, bleeding from wounds that steamed in the cold. She had found him when she went out to bring the dogs in, and instead of screaming for the guards, she had knelt down in the mud beside him. She did not know why. She still did not know why. She only knew that when his eyes opened and found hers, something in her chest pulled tight, like a hook had been set behind her ribs, and someone had given it one hard tug. She hid him in the old kennel shed. She cleaned his wounds. She fed him bread and broth and told him her name, and he told her almost nothing about himself, only that men were hunting him, and he could not stay. For 3 nights she nursed him. On the third night there was a fire, and warmth, and the kind of closeness that two frightened people fall into when the whole world outside wants them dead. In the morning he was gone. No note, no name, just a cold place in the straw where his body had been. She thought she would never think of him again. Believe me, she tried not to, but by midwinter her body had started to change, and she knew. And when her father's physician confirmed it, and her father demanded the name of the man, she had nothing to give him. No husband, no suitor, no lord's son to blame it on, just a stranger with no name who had walked out of the woods and back into them. Her father did not shout. That was the worst part. He went very quiet and very still, and he looked at her the way he looked at a bad ledger. He asked her the name 3 times, in 3 different ways, patient as a man closing a trap, and 3 times she told him the truth, that there was no name, and each time she said it she watched him decide a little more firmly that she was lying to protect someone. Because in her father's world, a woman was always protecting someone. It never once occurred to him that a stranger could walk into his daughter's life and take everything and leave nothing behind, not even a name to hate. Men like her father do not believe in ghosts. They believe in debts, and they believe in liars, and they had a daughter who suddenly looked like both. Then he called the guards. So there she was, on the road, cast out, carrying a child whose father was a ghost. She kept walking because stopping meant freezing, and freezing meant 2 of them died instead of 1. By the 2nd day the pine gave way to open country, and the cold changed its shape. Out from under the trees the wind had room to run, and it came across the white fields at her sideways, and it found every gap in that thin town cloak like it had been looking for them. She tore a strip off the hem and wrapped it over her face. She walked with her chin down and her arms crossed over her belly, and she thought about nothing, because thinking about the warm hall she had lost, or the maid who had cried when they took her, or the small kicking life she was carrying into the snow, would have finished her. So she made her mind as empty and white as the fields, and she counted her own steps, and when she lost the count she started again. By the afternoon she saw smoke, and by dusk she came down a long slope into a market town called Thornfield. It was a rough place, a river crossing, a bridge, a huddle of houses, and a wide muddy square where farmers and traders came to buy and sell before the deep winter closed the roads for good. There were pig pens and pot sellers, and a woman frying dough in old fat, and the smell of that dough nearly put Alira on her knees. She stood at the edge of the square for a long moment, swaying, and the woman at the dough pot looked up and saw her. She was a broad woman with a burn-scarred forearm and quick, dark eyes, and she looked at Alira the way people who have had a hard life look at other people having a hard one. Not with pity, exactly, but with recognition. She held out a twist of fried dough without a word. Alira had nothing to give her, and she said so, her voice cracking on the first words she had spoken to a person in 2 days. "Did I ask you for anything?" the woman said. "Eat. You're carrying. A carrying woman who faints in my square is bad for trade." But her eyes were kind when she said it, and when Alira took the dough with shaking hands, the woman watched her eat the whole thing before she turned back to her pot. "There's a name for what you are, girl. I know it when it walks up. Somebody's thrown you out." She said it flat, like weather. "Bridge Road. Past the last houses. There's a barn with half a roof. Nobody'll trouble you there. The man that owned it hanged himself 2 winters back, and folk think it's cursed, which is the best kind of place, because cursed means empty." She flicked hot fat off her fingers. "Watch the traders in the far corner. Watch the one with the long knife especially. He'll smile at a lone woman and mean nothing good by it. You hear me?" Alira heard her. She would remember the woman's warning within the hour, though not in the way either of them expected. Her name, Alira learned, was Mother Sill, and she had been feeding thrown-out people in that square for 20 years, and the reason will come clear before we're done, so hold on to her too, because here is the thing you already know, if you have ever had exactly one of something. Alira had 1 coin, 1 silver piece, sewn into the seam of her sleeve by a maid who had loved her when no one else did. 1 coin between her and nothing. She told herself she would spend it on food, and a corner to sleep in. Bread. A place on a wagon heading south, where the winters were softer and a woman with a swelling belly might find honest work before the child came. That was the plan. It was a good plan. It was the only plan she had, and Mother Sill had just handed her the missing piece of it, a dry corner with 3 walls and a curse on it to keep the world away. And then she heard the sound. It came from the far corner of the square, past the pig pens, where the ground turned to churned black mud, the same corner Mother Sill had told her to keep away from. A low sound, a groan, deep and wet, the sound a large animal makes when it has stopped fighting and started dying. A small crowd had gathered around it the way crowds gather around anything that is suffering, half pity and half appetite. She should have walked the other way. She had nothing to spare and every reason to save it. And a woman she trusted had told her not 5 minutes past to keep clear of exactly this corner. But her feet took her toward the sound before her head could argue, and that, right there, was the whole shape of Alira's life. Her feet always went toward the thing that was hurting. She had carried bread to a beaten boy at 9 years old and paid for it. And here she was, grown, cast out, with 1 coin to her name and a child in her belly, doing the exact same thing all over again. In the mud, tied to a post with a chain thick enough for a bull, was the largest animal she had ever seen. They were calling it a horse. It had 4 legs and a long body and a great heaving chest, and a trader, the one with the long knife, of course it was that one, was standing over it, slapping its flank and calling it a war horse, a giant of the northern breeds, a mount fit for a lord. But it was not a horse. Not quite. It was too heavy in the shoulders, too long in the jaw. Its coat was black going to gray, matted with old blood, and where the chain rubbed its neck the fur had burned away and left the skin beneath red and blistered, as if the metal itself were poison to it. And its eyes. Alira stopped moving when she saw its eyes. They were not the eyes of a horse. They were amber, gold at the center, and they were looking straight at her across all that mud and noise, with a focus that no dying animal should have been able to hold. It looked at her like it knew her. It looked at her like it had been waiting. The hook behind her ribs gave 1 hard tug. 2 coppers, the trader was shouting. 2 coppers and the beast is yours, hide and bones. Only a fool would pay it. The thing's going down tonight. He said it like a joke. A crippled monster nobody wanted, chained in the freezing mud, worth less than a bag of grain. He had that long knife on his belt, and Alira understood, in the cold way you understand things when you have run out of hope yourself, that the moment the crowd thinned he would cut the animal's throat and sell the meat and the hide and be done. A man near her in the crowd spat and said the trader was a liar and a cheat, that he had bought the beast off a hunting party 3 towns back for the price of a drink because they were sick of dragging it and could not kill it. 3 good crossbow bolts they'd put in it, the man said, and it had not died, and that had frightened them enough to sell it on cheap and ride hard the other way. Ain't natural, the man muttered, and stepped back out of the crowd, and Alira barely heard him, because the great head was lifting out of the mud. Slow, trembling. It took everything the beast had, you could see that, and it lifted its head anyway, and it looked at her, and it made that low, broken sound 1 more time. Not a threat. A question. She would tell people, later, that she did not decide, that her hand was already at her sleeve, working the last coin free of its stitches, before her mind had said a single word. "I'll take it," she said. The whole square turned to look at the pregnant girl in the ruined cloak. The trader laughed. Then he saw the silver in her hand, real silver, worth far more than his 2 coppers, and he stopped laughing and got very interested. For half a breath his eyes went from the coin to her, and then to the empty road behind her, doing a different sort of sum, and Alira saw it, and so did someone else. Across the square Mother Sill had come around her pot, and was standing with a heavy iron ladle in her fist and her scarred arm bare, watching the trader with a flat, dark stare that promised the whole square would hear about it if the girl came to harm. The trader felt that stare. He was a coward, as men with long knives and easy smiles usually are, and he decided the silver was enough. He took her coin. He unhooked the chain from the post and shoved it into her frozen fingers and told her the beast was her problem now, and good luck dragging a dying monster anywhere, and he was already turning away to count his silver before she had finished wrapping the chain around her wrist. So there she stood. No money, no food, no plan, nothing at all except a chain, and at the end of the chain, a huge broken animal with gold eyes that would not stop watching her. Now here is the thing. She should have felt like a fool. Everyone in that square thought she was one. But when she knelt down in the mud in front of that beast, and it lowered its enormous head until its brow rested against her shoulder, heavy and warm and shaking, she did not feel like a fool. She felt, for the first time since her father's guards had thrown her into the snow, like she was not entirely alone. Two ruined things at the edge of a market, keeping each other from going down. "Come on," she whispered to it. "Get up. We're not dying here. Not either of us." And somehow, on legs that should not have held it, the animal got up. It took them a long time to get out of Thornfield. The beast could barely walk. It leaned on her, and she leaned on it, and together they made a slow, crooked line out past the last houses, toward the fallen barn Mother Sill had told her of. The cursed one, half its roof gone but 3 walls standing and a corner still dry. They passed the dough pot on the way, and Mother Sill watched them go. This pregnant girl and this dying monster, and she did not say anything foolish about it. She only reached into the warm iron pot and pulled out a whole fistful of fried dough and pressed it into Alira's cloak, wrapped in a rag, hot against her ribs, and she said one thing. "When it lives," she said, not if, when, and Alira noticed that and held on to it. "And when you're back on your feet, you remember there's people in this world who feed the thrown-out ones. Be one of them. That's the only rent I charge." And she went back to her pot, and Alira carried her words all the way to the barn along with the warm bread, and she would, in the end, pay that rent in full. But that comes much later. She got the animal inside. She got a fire going with a flint and a prayer, and wood so damp it smoked more than it burned. And she sat down in the straw beside the biggest, strangest, most impossible creature she had ever touched, and she pressed her hand flat against its heaving side, and she felt its heart going far too fast under her palm. She did not sleep that night. She was too afraid that if she slept it would die, and she would wake up alone again. That was the beginning. A cast-out girl and a dying beast in a broken barn, and neither of them knowing what the other really was. By morning the fire had held, and the animal was still breathing, and that felt like a miracle. Now Alira knew a little about wounds. Nursing that nameless stranger had taught her more than her whole soft upbringing ever had. So in the gray light she made herself look at the beast properly, and what she found did not make sense. The burns around its neck, where the chain had lain, were the worst, but they were not ordinary burns. The skin there had gone black and silver, and the wound wept a fluid that smelled wrong, sharp and metallic, like a coin left too long in the mouth. When she leaned close, she could see, worked into the deep muscle of its shoulder, the broken-off head of an arrow. Old, festering, and the arrowhead was not iron. It was pale, and it gleamed, and it had left a spreading web of that same black-silver rot in the flesh around it. There were 2 more shafts snapped off short in its flank, she found, when she worked her fingers gently through the matted fur. The 3 bolts the man in the square had spoken of. 2 were plain iron, and those wounds were old and closing on their own. Only the silver one refused to heal. Silver. Someone had shot this animal with silver, and the metal was killing it slowly from the inside. "Who did this to you?" she said. The beast opened one gold eye and looked at her, and she had the maddest feeling that it wanted to answer. She got the arrowhead out. It took hours, and a heated knife, and more courage than she knew she had, and the whole time the animal held perfectly still, trembling but never once snapping at her, when any ordinary beast would have taken her arm off. It let her hurt it. It understood that she was trying to help. And when the silver finally came free, and she flung it out into the snow, the animal let out a long, shuddering breath and sagged into the straw, and the black rot around the wound stopped spreading almost at once. That was the first sign that this was no horse. Horses do not hold still while you dig metal out of their bones, because they understand your intentions. The days that followed settled into a strange kind of rhythm. She had no money, so she foraged. She dug frozen turnips out of an abandoned field. She snared a rabbit with a loop of chain and wept a little at how proud that made her. She melted snow for water and cupped it to the beast's mouth, and slowly, slowly, it began to drink on its own, then to eat, then to lift its head without shaking. The gray came out of its coat, and the black came back, glossy and thick, and the muscle filled out under it until the animal looked less like something dying and more like something that had only been pretending. And once a week, when she could bear to leave it, she walked the bridge road back into Thornfield with whatever she could spare, a brace of snared rabbits, a bundle of firewood, once a fistful of the last good turnips, and she left it at Mother Sill's pot. She could not pay for the dough she had been given, so she paid the only way she had, in kind in the cold, before she owned anything at all. Mother Sill never made much of it. She would take the rabbits and grunt and hand back a twist of fried dough, and once, only once, she said, "How's your monster?" And Alira said, "Living." And Mother Sill said, "Course it is. You don't do things by halves, girl. I saw that the first minute." And that was the whole of it. But it mattered. It kept Alira human across those long white weeks. It reminded her that she was still a person who belonged to a place with people in it, and not just a ghost in a cursed barn with a beast. She talked to the beast the whole time. She had no one else, so she told it everything. She told it about her father, and the cold way he had looked at her, and the guards, and the snow. She told it about the maid who had sewn the coin into her sleeve, whose name was Bet, who had raised her more than her own mother ever had, and who had wept and clung to her at the gate until the guards pulled her off. She told it about the kitchen boy and the bread, and the lessons she had never learned. She told it, one long night when the wind was screaming through the broken roof, and she was too tired to keep her own secrets, about the stranger in the woods, about the 3 nights, about the fire and the warmth, and waking up alone, about the child. "He didn't even leave me his name," she said, to the animal in the dark. "I would have followed him anywhere. He knew that. And he left before I woke up so he wouldn't have to say it to my face." The beast made a low sound then, deep in its chest, and it turned its great head and pressed its brow against her belly, gently, the way you might touch something sacred, and it held there. And Alira, half asleep and wholly alone in the world, put her arms around that huge black neck and cried into its fur until there was nothing left in her to cry. She did not notice, in the dark, that when its brow touched her belly, the animal went very still, the way a man goes still when he has just understood something that changes his entire life. Whatever it was healing, and so, strangely, was she. But I want to tell you about the day the hunter came, because it was the first crack in that piece, and because if she had not handled it exactly the way she did, none of the rest of it would have happened. It was maybe 5 weeks in. The beast could walk by then, could even trot its slow circles in the yard, but it was nowhere near well, and Alira had grown careless in the way people grow careless when nothing has gone wrong for a while. She had the barn door open to the thin sun. She was outside, breaking ice off the field pond, when she heard hooves on the bridge road and turned to see a rider coming, a lean, hard man in a boiled leather coat, a bow across his back and a brace of pale, fletched arrows at his hip, and Alira's whole body went cold before her mind caught up, because she had seen fletching like that once before. On the arrowhead she had pulled out of the beast's shoulder and thrown into the snow. A hunter, one of the ones who had put silver in her beast, and he was reining in, and he was looking past her at the open barn door, and inside that door the great black shape of the animal was already rising to its feet, with a low sound starting in its throat. Alira did the only thing she could think of. She made herself small and frightened and stupid, which was not hard, because she was frightened. She hurried toward the rider, wringing her hands and babbling about her poor sick plow horse, her only animal, half dead of the cold and the murrain. Would the good sir keep his distance, for she feared the sickness was catching, and her husband would beat her if the beast were disturbed and lost its footing and died. She talked and talked, the way a foolish, frightened farm wife talks, and she put herself squarely between the hunter and the door. The hunter's eyes went to the barn. to the black shape in the dark. He was very still for a moment, and Alira's heart slammed against her ribs because she could see him weighing it, could see the question forming. That is a very big horse, farm wife, and she pushed, before he could ask it, straight through her own terror. It bites, she said, dropping her voice, leaning in like she was ashamed. It's turned mean with the sickness, sir. It took a finger off the tinker's boy last week. I keep it chained. If it's meat you're after, I'll not stop you, but I warn you it's rotten with the murrain, and I'd not feed it to a dog. And she coughed, wetly, and wiped her nose, and let the fear of catching sickness do the rest. It worked. A hunter tracking a monster is not looking for a diseased plow horse guarded by a coughing pregnant peasant. He grimaced, and drew back, and told her to keep her sick beast well away from the road, and he turned his horse and rode on toward the next farmstead. But at the top of the rise he stopped, and he looked back at the barn for a long moment, and Alira held her stupid, frightened smile on her face the whole time, and only when he had gone over the rise and out of sight did her knees give out and put her down in the snow. The beast came out to her then, slow, and lowered its head to hers, and made that soft, questioning sound, and she wrapped her arms around its neck and shook. "They're still looking for you," she whispered into its fur. "Whatever you are, they haven't stopped." The beast pressed its brow to her belly, and it trembled too, and if she had been paying attention she would have understood that it was not trembling with fear for itself. She should have understood it then, but she still thought she had saved a horse. There were moments in those weeks that she would keep forever. The beast learning to walk again, testing its weight, then trotting a wide, slow circle around the ruined barn while she clapped like a child. The two of them lying back to back for warmth through the coldest nights. The morning she woke to find it had dragged a whole fallen deer up to the door, some gift from the dark, more meat than she could smoke in a week, and stood there watching her with those gold eyes as if to say, "You fed me, now I feed you." She had smoked what she could, and carried a whole haunch of it into Thornfield on her back, staggering under it, and dropped it at Mother Sill's pot, and for once the hard woman had been struck silent, and had looked at the girl and the meat for a long moment before she said, quietly, "You're paying it forward already. Good. That's how it's meant to go." She stopped being afraid of the beast. She started, without ever deciding to love it. Not the way you love a pet, the way you love the only creature in the world that has chosen to stay. And here is where I have to be honest with you about how good those last few days felt, because it matters for what comes next. The snow stopped falling, the wind died down, and the sky went a clean, pale blue, and the broken barn, patched now with branches and sod, held the fire's warmth right through the night. Alira had smoked meat hanging from the rafters, and a stack of dry wood taller than she was, and, for the first time in her whole life, a home that no one could throw her out of, because it was already broken and already hers. In the mornings she would sit in the doorway with her hands on her rounding belly and watch the great black animal sleep in a patch of thin sunlight, its huge sides rising and falling, slow and easy and safe. She would hum the old lullaby the maid Bet used to sing her. She felt, for a little while, completely at peace. She even let herself imagine a future, a small one, careful, the kind a cast-out girl learns to allow herself. She thought that when the roads opened she would take the beast south and find work, and the beast would guard her and the child, and she would be a healer maybe, or a woman who fried dough in a square and fed the thrown-out ones, paying Mother Sill's rent forward the way she'd been told. It was not a grand dream. It was a good one. It was hers. She should not have let herself have it. Believe me, she should not have. Because on the morning everything felt safest, she heard the horns. They came from the west, 3 long notes and then a 4th, hunting horns, close and getting closer, and under them the sound of many horses moving fast through the trees. Not one lone hunter this time. Many. And Alira knew, with the cold certainty of a woman who has already lost everything once, that the lone rider on the rise 5 weeks back had gone away and told someone, and that someone had counted the days and put it together, a very big horse in a cursed barn that would not die, and here they were. The black animal came off the floor of that barn like it had never been sick a day in its life. It did not stagger. It did not tremble. In one motion it was up, huge and coiled and terrible, and it put itself between Alira and the door, and the low sound it made now was nothing like the broken groan of a dying thing in the mud. It was a snarl that shook the straw off the rafters, and in that instant, watching its shoulders bunch and its lips peel back from teeth that were far too long, Alira understood that she had never once, in all these weeks, been keeping a horse. The riders that came through the trees wore black and silver, and on their breasts they carried the crest of a running wolf, and they were not looking for a girl at all. They had come for the beast, and the man leading them stood in his stirrups, pointed a gloved hand straight at the barn, and shouted words that turned Alira's blood to ice. "The king's still alive! There! Take him before he shifts!" The king, not the beast, not the animal, the king. And that one word cracked her whole small, safe world down the middle, because in the space of a single breath, this stopped being the story of an outcast girl and a stray she had saved, and became something far larger and far worse. These were not her father's men. This was not about her shame, or her banishment, or a lord's hurt pride. This was a hunt that had been crossing a kingdom, and the thing it was hunting was sleeping in her barn. And now she was standing in the middle of it with a child in her belly and nowhere left to run. If you're still with me, and I hope you are, hit that subscribe button, because this is where the whole thing turns. The black beast lunged. It went through the barn door and into the riders like a landslide, and the neat black and silver line came apart in screaming and horseflesh. It was faster than anything that size had any right to be. It took one man off his saddle and flung him into a tree. It closed its jaws on a spear shaft and snapped it like a reed. But there were a dozen of them, and they had done this before, and they spread out and circled, and Alira saw the nets come off the pack horses, weighted nets strung with pale gleaming weights, and the weights were silver. "Don't kill him," the leader shouted. "Lord Draven wants him alive. Bring him down slow. Lord Draven." She filed the name away even as her heart hammered, because a name is a thing you can use later, if there is a later. The beast fought. God, it fought. But every time the silver touched it, it screamed, a sound with too much of a man in it, and its great limbs seized and slowed, and Alira watched the poison she had spent weeks pulling out of it go pouring back in through 100 small burning points. They were going to take it. Him. They were going to net him and drag him back to whoever Lord Draven was, and she was going to be alone again, and this time she would not survive it. So Alira did the only thing an outcast with nothing left has ever been able to do. She stopped being careful. She snatched a burning branch from the fire and ran straight out of the barn into the middle of the fight, and she swung it at the nearest horse's face, and the horse reared and threw its rider, and for one wild instant the whole hunt froze at the sheer madness of it. A pregnant girl in a ruined cloak, screaming, on fire, swinging at armed men. "Leave him alone," she shrieked. "He's mine. I paid for him. He's mine." The leader wheeled his horse toward her, and his face, when he saw her belly, did something ugly and calculating. "Well," he said, "and who are you?" And that was the moment the beast stopped fighting the net and turned its gold eyes on her, and Alira saw in them a terror that had nothing to do with silver or death. It was afraid for her. Only for her. And a creature does not look at you like that. A creature cannot look at you like that. She knew, then. In her bones she knew, before she had any of the words for it. "Don't touch her," said a voice. It was not her voice. It was not the leader's. It came from the tangle of nets and silver where the beast had been, low and rough and human. A man's voice grinding up out of a wolf's throat, and every rider in that clearing went dead silent when they heard it. "Do not," said the voice again, "touch her." And then the beast rose up out of the nets, and it changed. I want you to picture it exactly as she saw it, because she never forgot a second of it, not for the rest of her life. The black limbs drew in, the great spine cracked and reshaped, the fur receded like a tide going out, and the shape that had been an animal folded and rose and stood, and where the beast had been there was a man, a tall man, broad through the shoulders, black hair falling loose around a hard, scarred face, naked to the freezing air and utterly unbothered by it, with the same gold eyes burning out of a human face now, fixed on her. There was silver rot still webbed black across his ribs. There was a fresh net tangled at his feet. And there was, unmistakably, on the left side of his chest, over his heart, the puckered white scar of an old wound she had cleaned with her own 2 hands, months ago, in a kennel shed, by firelight. Elira's burning branch dropped out of her fingers into the snow. "You," she said, because it was him, the stranger from the woods, the nameless man she had nursed for 3 nights and lost by morning, the man who had left her without a word and left her carrying his child. He had walked out of her life a wounded stranger, and he had come back into it as a dying animal she had spent her last coin to save, and she had loved him both times without ever once knowing his name. "Elira," he said, her name in his mouth, at last. "I never meant for you to find me like this. You left." It came out of her cracked and furious and broken. "You left me. You knew. You left me." "I left to keep them from finding you," he said, and he took 1 step toward her, and the whole ring of riders flinched back as if a fire had moved. "They were hunting me even then. If they had known there was a woman I would die for, they would have used you against me. I thought if I disappeared, you would be safe. I was wrong. I have been wrong about a great many things." His gold eyes dropped, just once, to the curve of her belly, and something in his hard, scarred face came apart. "I did not know," he said softly, "about the child. I swear to you on my life, I did not know." "Who are you?" she whispered. "What are you?" He straightened, and when he spoke again his voice was not the voice of a stranger, or a lover, or a beast. It was the voice of a man used to being obeyed by hundreds. "My name is Chaol," he said. "I am the Alpha King of the Ironmoor Pax, or I was, until my own brother put silver in my blood and a hunt on my trail and stole my throne, while the whole kingdom believed I was dead." He turned his gold eyes on the leader of the riders, and the man went white. "And you," Chaol said, very quietly, "have just made the worst mistake of your short life, because you found me, and you saw her, and now Draven knows I live, and he will not stop until we are both dead and the child with us." The clearing was silent except for the frightened horses. Elira stood in the snow between the man she had loved twice and a dozen soldiers sent to kill him, and she understood at last the full size of the thing she had walked into when her feet, as always, carried her toward the creature that was hurting. This had never been a small story. She had saved a king. She was carrying a king's heir, and a usurper on a stolen throne now had every reason in the world to want her dead. "Chaol," she said, "there are 12 of them." He smiled then, and it was not a kind smile. It was the smile of a wolf who has finally stopped being prey. "There were 12 of them," he said. "What happened next happened fast, and I am going to give it to you exactly, because this is the part the whole story has been driving toward." The leader gave the order to loose the silver nets, and Chaol moved before the words were out of his mouth. He was between 2 riders before their horses knew to bolt. He did not shift back to the beast, not fully. He did not need to. Weak as he was, silver-sick as he was still the strongest creature any of those men had ever faced, and he had spent weeks getting well under the hands of a girl who would not let him die. He took the leader off his horse and put him down in the snow and did not kill him. That was the thing Elira noticed even in the middle of the chaos. He hurt them, he scattered them, he broke their weapons and their courage, but he kept killing off the table like a coin he refused to spend. "Run," he told them, when it was done and half of them were on the ground, and the other half were clinging to bolting horses. "Go back to my brother. Tell him the true king is coming home. Tell him I know what he did. And tell him," Chaol said, and here his voice dropped to something that made even Elira's skin go cold, "that if he has harmed one of the old pack in my name, I will take back every drop of what he stole, and I will take it slowly." They ran. Of course they ran. And then Chaol turned, and the terrible king went out of his face, and he crossed the snow to Elira and went down on his knees in front of her. This enormous man, this alpha, this king, kneeling in the red slush at the feet of a cast-out girl, and he pressed his forehead against her rounded belly exactly the way the beast had done in the dark, and she felt him shaking. "I felt it," he said, muffled, wrecked. "Every night in that mud, when I was too far gone to shift, too far gone to speak, when I did not even remember my own name. I felt you near me. I felt the child. My wolf knew you before I did. That is why I could not die. I could not die while you two were in the world." He looked up at her, and there were tears cutting clean lines through the dirt on his face, a king weeping openly in the snow. "You spent your last coin on me," he said. "You had nothing left in the world, and you spent it on a dying animal that everyone told you to walk away from. Do you understand what you are to me? Do you understand what you have always been? Say it," Alira whispered. She had spent her whole life being sold and traded and thrown away. She needed, just once, to hear someone choose her out loud. Say it plainly. No more disappearing. No more leaving before I wake. Say it to my face. "You are my mate," Kale said. "Fated, chosen, the other half of my own soul. I knew it the first night in the woods, and I ran from it because I thought loving you would kill you. I was a fool and a coward, and it cost you everything, and I will spend the rest of my life earning back what my leaving took from you." He took her cold hands in his warm ones. "Alira of Greywater," cast out with nothing. "You will not be nothing ever again. I am asking you to be my queen, not because of the child, because it was always going to be you. It was you in the woods, and it was you in that market when you knelt in the mud, and it is you now. Come home with me. Help me take back what is ours, and let me give our child the name its grandfather tried to erase." And Alira, who had been thrown out of a gate into the snow, with nothing but a coin and a ghost, looked at the king kneeling in front of her, and made the second decision of her life that came from somewhere deeper than her mind. "Get up," she said, and she was crying and laughing at once. "Kings don't kneel. Get up, and take me home, and let's go take your throne back. Now, taking a throne back is not a thing you do in an afternoon, and I won't pretend otherwise. It took the rest of that winter. Kale was still silver-sick, still weak, and Draven held the high seat of Ironmore with the whole standing army, and a story the Pax believed, that the old king was dead, and the new one was merciful for taking up the burden, so they did it the slow way. And the first place they went, before any camp of loyal wolves, was back down the bridge road into Thornfield, to a dough pot in a muddy square, because Alira would not leave without saying goodbye to the one person in the world who had fed her when she had nothing, and because Kale, when she told him the story on the walk, had gone very quiet and then said a thing she did not expect. "Syl," he said, "broad woman, burned arm, feeds the outcasts, dark eyes that see straight through you." Alira stared at him. He almost smiled. There was a she-wolf of the Ironmore Pax, years back, exiled for hiding a litter Draven's faction wanted culled. She took an oath to feed the thrown-out ones wherever she landed, since she had been thrown out herself. I thought she was dead. And when they came to the square, and Mother Syl looked up from her pot and saw the girl and the tall gold-eyed man beside her, the ladle fell out of her hand into the fat, and she came around the pot and went down on one knee in the mud in front of Kale, and said, in a voice Alira had never heard from her, "My king, they told us you were dead. They tell everyone that," Kale said, and he raised her up. "You fed my mate when she had nothing, and my child in her belly, and you asked her only to pay it forward. There is no rent in my kingdom I would rather owe." And Mother Syl, who was truly named Scylla of the Ironmore, an exile older than Alira's whole life, banked her fire and closed her pot, and walked out of Thornfield at their side, the first of the loyal wolves to come home, and not the last, and it was she who knew where the scattered old guard were hiding, and it was she who led them there. That is why I told you to hold on to her. In a story about the cost of kindness, the woman who fed strangers for 20 years turns out to be the hinge the whole ending swings on. It usually is. So they went to the scattered loyal wolves, the old guard Draven had exiled or driven off, the ones who had never believed the king was truly gone. Kale walked into their hidden camps a living dead man, and the moment they scented him, the moment their wolves knelt to his, The lie Draven had built began to rot from the inside, and everywhere Chaol went, he brought her. That was the part that undid the Pax more than anything, not the returned king. The girl at his side, belly round with the true heir, who told them plainly how she had found their alpha dying in the mud, chained and sold for the price of a rabbit, poisoned with silver by his own blood. The Pax had been told the king died with honor. Here was the truth, walking among them, carrying it in her body. Draven had not just stolen a throne. He had tried to murder his brother and let a pregnant girl pay the price of saving him. Wolves will forgive a hard king. They will not forgive a coward who poisons his own blood and lies about it. By the thaw, the Pax were coming over in droves. And here I have to tell you the one part of it that did not go clean, because a true story never does. Draven was not a fool, whatever else he was. When he understood the Pax were turning, he did the thing cornered men do. He reached for the softest target he could find. He sent word, quiet word, along a road far to the west, to a hard man with a soft reputation, who had a grievance against the very girl the false rumors now named as the Wolf King's woman. He sent word to Lord Harwin of Greywater that the daughter he had cast out was carrying a monster's child, and that a great lord would pay well to have the shame ended before it could be born and crowned. Illyra's own father. That was Draven's play, to have the girl undone by the one man who had already thrown her away once. And it very nearly worked, because Harwin, God help him, considered it. A cast-out daughter was a debt, and here was a lord offering to pay the debt off in coin and call it done. He sent 2 men east along the thaw roads to find her. They found Mother Sill instead, on the camp's edge, and Scylla of the Ironmoor was old, but she had been a she-wolf of the High Pax once, and she took one of Harwin's men alive, and from him the whole plot came apart into the light. Chaol wanted to ride on Greywater that same night and pull it down stone by stone. Illyra stopped him, put her hand flat on his chest, over the scar she had cleaned by firelight, and stopped a king with a look. "No," she said. "He is not worth the wolves you'd lose taking those walls, and he is not worth what it would do to you to become the kind of king who burns a man's house for a letter he only thought about sending. Let me deal with my father, when it's time." And Chaol, who had learned by then to trust that her feet always knew the way, let it be. Hold on to that too. She was building toward a reckoning with her father, and she meant to have it her own way, in her own house, with her own crown on. The end came at the old hall of Ironmoor on the first warm night of spring. Chaol walked in through the great doors with his loyal Pax at his back and Illyra at his side, and Scylla of the Ironmoor a pace behind them, and Draven rose from the stolen high seat with all his fear finally showing on his face. He tried the old lie one more time. He called Chaol a trick, a false wolf, a dead man's shadow. He even, at the last, tried to name Illyra the monster's whore, and the child an abomination, playing to the fear he had spent a year sowing. And it might have worked on a frightened hall, except that Scylla of the Ironmoor stepped forward into the torchlight, old and scarred and known to half the elders in that room, and said in a ringing voice that she had fed this girl with her own hands when she had nothing, and watched her spend her last coin on a dying king everyone told her to leave in the mud, and that if that was what an abomination looked like, then the Pax had been worshipping the wrong things for 100 years. And then Chaol simply stood in the center of that hall, in front of the whole kingdom, and shifted, slow and deliberate and whole, the great black beast rising up out of the man for every wolf in the room to see and scent and know. There was no mistaking a king's wolf. There never is. The hall went down on its knees in a wave, and Draven stood alone on the dais with no one left to lie to. He went for a silver blade, at the end. Of course he did. He lunged for Illyra with it, because he was the kind of man who, cornered, always reaches for the softest target, and he had understood from the first that she was the thing Chaol could not bear to lose. He had tried to have her killed by her own father and failed. He would do it himself, here, in front of everyone, and take the heir with her. He never reached her. Illyra had spent a whole winter learning that her feet did not always have to carry her toward the thing that was hurting. Sometimes they could carry her out of the way of the thing that meant her harm. She stepped back, and Chaol was there. And this time, the king did not keep the killing off the table. It was over quickly. I'll spare you the worst of it. A usurper who poisons his own brother and tries to buy a father into murdering his own daughter and reaches at the last for a pregnant woman with a silver knife does not get a long and dignified end, and the Pax of Ironmore did not weep for him. And then it was done. The hall was Chaol's again. The throne was Chaol's again. And the girl who had been dragged out of a gate with a rope on her wrists stood in the heart of a kingdom that was now impossibly hers. The child came a month after the crowning, in the warm part of the spring. A daughter, black-haired, gold-eyed, loud enough to wake the whole hall, healthy as anything Alira had ever held. The Pax came from every corner of the land to see the heir, and they knelt not because they were told to, but because they wanted to, for the queen who had saved their king with her last coin and a stubborn refusal to walk away from a dying thing in the mud. And the first person Alira sent for, before any lord or elder, was the maid Bet of Greywater, who had sewn a silver coin into a doomed girl's sleeve out of love, sent a fast rider and a warm cloak and a place at the queen's own side for the rest of her days, because Alira did not forget the ones who fed her either. Mother Sila of the Ironmore, stood as the child's sworn shield, restored to the high Pax she had been exiled from a lifetime ago, and she wept exactly once when the baby's small hand closed around her burned finger, and then never let anyone see her do it again. Her father came too. That is a thing I have to tell you, because it is where her story truly closes. Lord Harwin of Greywater came to the high hall of Ironmore, older and smaller than she remembered, and he knelt at the foot of his daughter's throne with his hat in his hands. He had heard, as everyone had heard, that the girl he threw into the snow was now the queen of the wolves, and he had come to be forgiven, or to be rewarded, or simply to be let back into the warmth. He talked about honor. He talked about a father's love. He talked, as he always had, in the language of a man tallying a ledger. He did not know that she knew about the letter, about the 2 men he had sent east, about how close he had come to selling her death the way he had once tried to sell her life. He did not mention it. He thought it was a secret still. Alira let him finish. Then she stood up, with her daughter in her arms, and she came down the steps of the dais, and she stopped in front of the man who had cast her out. "You threw me into the snow," she said quietly. "You put a rope on me, and you read out a sentence, and you had your men kick me while I held my child, and not one person in your hall moved to help me." She was not angry. That was the thing that finally broke him. There was no anger left in her at all. And then, this winter, when a usurper offered you coin to finish what the snow had started, you sent 2 men east to find me. "I know, father." Mother Sill took one of them alive. "I have known for months." She watched the color leave his face. "I walked out of your gate with 1 coin and nothing else. And do you know what I found? Out there in the cold you sent me to die in? I found the only family that ever chose to keep me. I found a woman who fed me for free. I found a beast who dragged a whole deer to my door because I fed him first. I found the exact opposite of everything you ever taught me, and it saved my life, and it made me a queen." She did not have him harmed. She was not her father, and she was not Draven, and she had learned the difference the hard way, and she had promised Chaol she would settle it her own way, in her own house, with her own crown on, and here she was doing exactly that. She gave him a horse and a day's food, and had him escorted back to his own lands, and she told him he would never be turned away hungry from her gate, and he would never once be let past it either, not for the letter, not for the snow, not ever. Then she went back up the steps and sat down on her throne with her daughter, and did not watch him go. That night, when the hall was quiet, Chaol found her standing in the great open doorway of Ironmore, looking out at the last of the melting snow with the baby asleep against her chest. He came and stood behind her and wrapped his arms around them both, one great warm circle, keeping the cold out, and for a while neither of them said anything at all. "You're thinking about the gate," he said finally. He always knew. "Your father's gate. The snow. I stood in a doorway once with my arms around my belly," she said, "and men on the far side of it wanted me gone." She looked down at the doorway she stood in now, the great carved doors of a kingdom, thrown open and warm at her back, and at the child breathing slow and safe in the circle of her arms. And now I'm standing in a doorway with my arms around my child, and everyone on the far side of it would die before they let anything take her from me. She let out a long breath, and it did not shake any more. Same girl, same arms, same snow, completely different world. Because you spent your last coin, Kale said against her hair. On a dying thing everyone told you to leave in the mud. Because I never could walk away from something that was hurting, she said. It's the worst thing about me, and the best. She turned her gently to face him, and the gold eyes she had first seen over a chain in a freezing market looked down at her and the daughter they had made, and the scarred, hard face of the alpha king of the Ironmore Pax was, in that moment, the softest thing in the world. Then never learn better, he said. Promise me, whatever comes, never learn to walk away. And Alira, who had been sold and traded and cast out, who had spent her last coin on a dying horse and found a king inside it, who had gone from a rope on her wrists to a crown on her head in the span of a single hard winter, stood in the warm open doorway of her home, with her family gathered close, and made him the easiest promise she had ever made. Never, she said, not for as long as I live. And she never did.